I think the order in which we'll go, I haven't cleared it with the speakers, but why don't we start off, if I can get all the intros together, with Mr. I know I have Mr.
Nuding.
Nuding, okay.
Yes.
Then we'll follow that with Mr. Bradley, and then Natasha Korecki, and since Amanda, I believe, has her copy of War and Peace, we'll put her last, and that way we will have it. So let me introduce everybody with my usual terse. Tim Nuding is the director of the Illinois Governor's Office of Management and Budget. 26 years in state government.
Yes, sir.
Give him a round of applause just for that. That's right. Anyways, he came from the Senate Republican staff, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Graduated from Illinois State University with a bachelor's degree in finance. And he lives in beautiful Rochester, Illinois. How about a round of applause for... Next is Representative John Bradley, the 117th District. Serves as Assistant Majority Leader and Chair of the Revenue and Finance Committee. Born in Harrisburg, Illinois. How many of you have ever been to Harrisburg, Illinois? Holy smokes, this is a bunch of ringers. Whoa.
This is my room.
All right, one more. How many of you have ever been to Muddy? All right, now we're getting down serious stuff. All right, I'll stop. That's Southern Illinois, right near Saline County? Is that how we pronounce it?
Saline.
Saline, yes.
You need a bit more of an accent.
Seldom am I speechless. Okay, well, I think we got enough from him. Bachelor's degree in government from the University of Texas, law degree from the U of I, and now lives in Marion with his wife and 3 sons. How about a big round of applause? There you go. Natasha Korecki is next. Used to be with the Sun-Times, is now the senior political reporter for Politico. She has her daily blog. You all should be getting it. All the news you can use. And the rumor has it that tomorrow night she will be at the Hideout, screaming and yelling with Jaworski and Dumke from the Reader, and some guy, who's the fourth person?
One Steve Brown. Ooh.
The room gets silent. All right, how about a big oh, wait a minute. Natasha wrote the book on Blagojevich, and I could vouch that she was the fastest typist at the trial. And how about a big round of applause for Natasha? Last but not least, Amanda Vinicky, State House Bureau Chief, Illinois Public Radio Network, and the star of Chicago Tonight, WTTW. I love this. She follows the machinations of the General Assembly.
It's true.
Any of you think you got a tough job? Just remember that line. Amanda graduated from the U of I in journalism, and she graduated also, that's her BA and her MA, of course, from the UIS Public Affairs Reporting Program. How about a big round of applause for Amanda? Okay, Mr. Nuding, you got 5 to 7 minutes. We call that loosely. Why don't you set the table for the rest of us?
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me. And I want to preface this by saying that I will have some optimistic things to say, I think, later. But I'm going to try and provide some context. We are at I believe today is exactly day 125 of the budget impasse, the longest in Illinois history. And I want to remind everyone of the context within which we're having this budget impasse, because I think it's important and critically relevant to the discussion that we're going to have here today, and frankly, the discussion that we're having in Springfield regarding the budget and all of the other issues related to the budget. The truth is that Illinois has been in a downward spiral for years. We have not been living up to our potential, our great potential, not even close. We have underperformed the nation economically for at least the last 15 years. We trail the national trends in job growth. Since 2000, the United States has added 10 million jobs nationally. Illinois has received none of those jobs. We have 100,000 less jobs today than we had in the year 2000. We consistently have one of the highest unemployment rates in America. Our national reputation is not good either for our political climate or for our business climate. I think that's well accepted. We have the worst credit ratings in America. Our largest city, this city, has the worst credit rating of any major city in America outside of Detroit. And our largest school district here in Chicago is in financial distress, severe financial distress. In the last 15 years, our state's unfunded pension liabilities have quintupled from $20 billion to now over $100 billion, the worst such deficit in America. We have one of the highest levels of outmigration in America based on many studies, which means people are leaving Illinois for opportunity elsewhere. Illinoisans have lost their mojo. They are down on Illinois. In a Gallup poll conducted last fall, 28% of Illinoisans said that our state, Illinois, is the worst state in which to live. That was the highest of any other state mentioned. 50% of Illinoisans said they'd leave Illinois if they could. That was also the highest of any other state in America. It is against this backdrop that Governor Rauner is advocating for change. And he's encountering severe resistance. And that's what we're going to discuss today. Again, this is day 125 of the budget impasse, the longest budget impasse in Illinois history. The legislature has not passed a balanced budget. We vetoed a $4 billion out of balance budget, and there has not been much movement, frankly, since. In the absence of legislative intervention, much spending is locked in through what I like to call the 3 C's, and that's what we're dealing with now in the governor's budget office. Continuing appropriations, which are written into statute, things like pension payments, payments to local governments, debt service payments, Medicaid rates, all of these things, spending levels are locked into statute by the legislature. Those 4 items that I just mentioned represent over 50% of the general fund's budget. Those things are happening because by law, they have to. Consent decrees. The courts are essentially in the absence of a budget running state finances. And I can promise you, the judges that are making these rulings don't have calculators on their desks. They are forcing us to spend money through consent decree and through court order. Through the 3 C's, the spending that's happening right now is equal to or greater than the revenue that we have coming in at this point. And then there are other things like the state employee group health plan where we're providing service and payments have to be made. So we are spending to an unbalanced budget on autopilot at this point. At GOMB, we're doing our best to keep government functioning in the absence of appropriation authority, and it's not easy. But in rounding up and in conclusion, there is a struggle for change going on right now in Springfield with Governor Rauner championing change. And the budget is just one component of that discussion.
All right, round of applause for Mr. Nuding. Very well. I don't take notes as fast as Natasha does. The 3 C's, continuing appropriations, consent decrees, and what's the 3rd C?
Court orders. Court orders.
Court orders. I'm taking notes, just, you know. Okay, Mr. Bradley, you're up.
Don't check your microphones. I really sound like this. And yes, we live in Illinois. First thing I want to do is introduce my beautiful wife, Michelle, who's with me here today. And for those of you who want to put some context into how big this state is, we actually live just south on the Dan Ryan. If you go south on the Dan Ryan, right before you get to Kentucky, you make a right, and you're in Marion. But in all seriousness, I love the opportunity to do things like this because I think it's important to remember that this is a big state. I love Illinois. I love being a part of Illinois. I love being an Illinoisan. And I represent an area that's often overlooked. I don't know if it's because of the social differences where the people that I represent myself have different ideas on some of these issues, like the fact that I have an A rating with the NRA. They're proud of that. I'm proud of that. But because of that, I think sometimes we forget about all the things that we have in common. We want to fund our kids in school. We want to pay for their educations. Michelle and I don't think it's fair that the children in our districts only get $6,000 a year spent on them as compared to other areas of the state. Our children, only $6,000. And really, I somewhat resent, or I don't really appreciate the notion that this is some kind of political or ego battle going on. This is ideological. This is an ideological battle. When I'm out talking to people and listening to people, and it's not just in our area, it's throughout the state. What I hear is a young mother doesn't understand why the payment of daycare so that she can go to work is conditioned on doing right to work in the state of Illinois. And a hospital doesn't understand why they might have to shut their doors unless we eliminate collective bargaining. And a young family or a middle-aged family doesn't understand why they can't get funding for their home health care for their parents who worked their whole life unless we eliminate vast parts of workers' comp, prevailing wage, basically the middle class. So when the options that we're presented are that the only way we're going to have a budget is the elimination or the diminishment of the middle class, is the diminishment of the organizations that represent and protect the middle class, downstate health care, things that we very much care about. That's what's going on. That's what's going on. I would also mention it's very difficult. It's very difficult. I believe in democracy. The Constitution is very clear. It says the appropriation process takes place through the legislature and the executive branch, not in the court system. And these consent decrees, which are consent decrees, they're being agreed to. They're being agreed to by the executive and the judiciary, sometimes at rates higher than what the legislature was willing to do, are taking place outside the context of the normal constitutional appropriation method. Whatever you may think of individuals, whatever you may think of a personality here or there, we all have to respect the Constitution. We all have to respect our democracy, and we all have to respect the process of American democracy. One final thing I'll point out. It's very challenging trying to deal with the inconsistencies that are put forth in front of us. For instance, my colleagues were told on the other side to vote against the K through 12 budget, but yet it was signed. Yet it was signed. One moment, the local government distributive fund is on the table. One moment, it isn't. We're told by certain forces that we need to eliminate prevailing wage. But yet the Capitol Facts reports that the elimination of prevailing wage taken in the most favorable light to the arguments of Governor Rauner is less than a rounding error of savings on property taxes. I have supported the property tax proposal. I was the chief negotiator and worked with all groups to try to work through very difficult issues over the years. I am prepared to continue to do that. My caucus is prepared to continue to do that, but not at the expense of the middle class and not at the expense of core values, core ideological values that most people in this room would say, yeah, I agree with.
Round of applause for Bradley. Natasha, you're up.
Thanks for having me. Checking, 1, 2, 3. There we go. Thanks for having me here today. It's great, and I'm really enjoying my new role being with Politico Illinois. But I just want to address maybe a couple things from either side of me. First of all, to say that politics is not involved and egos is not involved, I think is somewhat laughable. Certainly, there's ideological differences that are going on here, but I think one of the biggest issues going on in Illinois right now is a severe level of distrust. And that's existed probably toward the beginning of the year from Michael Madigan's office and Bruce Rauner's office. It's been a very, very difficult relationship. It's been extremely rocky. They do not trust each other. To say that this is ideological, of course it is. There is some of that. I think when Bruce Rauner really started the year off on his right to work tour that alienated people in his own party and people on the other side of the aisle, certainly. To me, as a political reporter, where I saw things kind of fall apart, and it sort of seemed like, if you go back to the beginning of the year where they were still trying to solve last year's budget, right, the previous fiscal year's budget, they came together, they came to an agreement, and, there were some cuts, some people were unhappy, but overall, they got something passed. And we were all like, oh my gosh, wow, movement in Springfield, this is amazing. And then I could be wrong, but I think the wheels sort of came off a few weeks later. It was that day where the governor's office on Friday, it was a Good Friday, they called the Good Friday Massacre, and right after Mike Madigan was on the House floor and said, okay, we came to an agreement, but autism will not be cut. Certain social services will not be cut. And then boom, the governor's office cut it. And it just did so much to disrepair. It just fractured that relationship, I think, and that thereby began the beginning of the distrust. And and we've all seen these hearings going on in Springfield, and I would say that it's not just distrust, it's disrespect. And I know you've gone back and forth with some people from the governor's office as well. They don't show up to hearings, or they go there and they mock the people who are calling the hearings. It's just and so all it's doing is just creating this worse and worse environment. That's from my standpoint. If you want to take a step back and look at, how do we solve this thing, and all of these groups that are really getting hurt right now, and that's the sad part, as I'm sure Leslie Munger's here and she knows firsthand. It's the most needy in our state who are getting hurt right now, and because they don't have lobbyists and they don't have like a big voting block. They're the ones who are getting hurt. I mean, I hear from people all the time who say this is literally a matter of life and death right now for us, and they're still fighting with each other. There's in November 18th, there's this meeting, and people are even joking about like this meeting that's going to happen. Like, I don't mean to be all doom and gloom, but I kind of am.
You're doing a good job of it.
I just think that if egos were put aside and there was some real discussion, that maybe there could be some movement. And I think both Madigan and Rauner, and I'm just singling them out, but obviously it's bigger than that, but I think they've painted themselves into such a corner right now, and they don't know how to get out of it. And someone needs to kind of help each side pry them out of it. And the other thing I wanted to just address with what Tim was saying, you talk about the reputation for Illinois and the credit downgrades, but what has this impasse done? It's not improved any of that. It's made it worse. I mean, I've heard more and more people talk about wanting to leave the state, certainly we've suffered these tremendous credit ratings. And finally, I'll close with, there's two sides. Each side has the ability to fix it. Therefore, in my view, each side is clearly at fault. If you can fix it, then it's unquestionably, it's on your lap.
Okay, round of applause for Natasha. Now, after we call on Amanda, we'll have a little interaction up here, and then get your questions on the official forums, on your tables, and we'll have our young people pick them up, and then we'll go at each other. Amanda Vinicky, banning cleanup. Go ahead, Amanda.
All right. So I'm going to do something a little bit dangerous for a journalist and provide some numbers, those scary things. But I won't use words like quintuple, because I've never used that one before. Just wanted to get that in on record, so I had it once. But we'll start with a really easy one, and that is the number 2, for a couple of reasons. Obviously, we are in day 2 of the 5th month without a budget, but it's also, in 2 days, it will be the anniversary of Governor Bruce Rauner's election. And I think that that's notable just to know where we came from. At that time, Illinois knew we were heading for a bleak budget situation given the rollback of the income tax increase. And as soon as that November 4th, or well, I guess it was really the 5th by the time we technically knew, but that it was Pat Quinn had lost after his advocating for Illinois to keep that higher rate, the state knew, and all of the politicians, the staff, reporters, everybody was aware of where we were at. And it is a rare occasion where after Bruce Rauner had asked, please don't keep the tax increase higher, allow it to fall, the legislators were obedient. They said yes and allowed that to happen. And it's interesting because at this time, this is a talk that is meant to be about the budget situation in Springfield, when really we have had very little to no talk about the actual budget. It has been very much focused on the turnaround agenda, and yes, the ideological differences, the politics, and the egos. There has been, so another number here, an easy one, again, 0, like zip, about how Illinois is going to address any sort of revenue issues. And the speaker has said he believes that that will be the easy part. When Illinois gets there, that talking revenue will be easy. But I feel like there is a monster challenge there, obviously, because the whole argument on Governor Rauner's behalf is that, hey, if you agree with me, I'll give you more revenue. But of course, it is never an easy vote to increase taxes. So that is not getting any sort of win for Democrats. That's not a prize that you necessarily are hurrying and wanting to claim. And further, as we've noted and Natasha pointed out, this level of distrust at this point, that's going to be all the more harder to reach any sort of revenue agreement. And as Illinois has done, I think a lot of people in this room would say previously, failed to really get to the heart of a true discussion. And instead of doing it, how Illinois could best solve a problem, there's a lot of nipping around the edges, quick action at the last minute to make something happen in order for you to round up votes. So there's a gigantic missed opportunity to be thoughtful about how Illinois wants to have this approach. And of course, the longer the impasse goes on, the harder it gets and the longer Illinois has gone without revenue. And then there are a whole load of numbers about all of the money that Illinois is wasting because of the impasse, be it because of higher interest needing to be paid due to that credit rating falling, or due to numbers like a report that just came out about $181 million that municipalities are behind in getting money, so they can't have road projects and pay for salt ahead of a winter, or money like the $50 million that the state has spent in the past 5 years paying interest because it's so behind on its backlog of bills. So there's another key number, of course, the approximately $7 billion, give or take. I don't know, the comptroller's here. I think the last update that I saw was October 28th, and that was actually a little lower than it had been, just a matter of cash flow. But point being, we all know this bill backlog is rising, 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 and it gets to the 3 C's, which are, for me, one of the major points in this budget impasse, because we can't really call it a shutdown. It is interesting, I think, to notice what a very different place the state would be in, what different discussion we would be having right now if it weren't for all of these consent decrees, if it weren't for the continuing appropriations. There would not be money flowing. State workers wouldn't be getting paid. So all these vast constituencies would be really raising a ruckus instead of the piecemeal social service organizations and the universities that are really the 2 major groups that have thus far been left out. And when talking about this court situation, and it has, in a sense, Illinois allowed the state to be paid for, governed by judges without calculators. Yes, and it's interesting because while the governor has bemoaned this, as has the budget staff, at the same time has definitely participated in it and encouraged it as well, as has the comptroller's office. And for a lot of people would argue that's a good thing because there'd be a whole lot of more pain being caused. But nonetheless, it is a difficult ask for those who follow to say, on one hand, you are disregarding the consent decrees. On the other hand, it is because of them that things are not as bad as they could be, or even that a lot of political hide has been saved thanks to those judges. We should all remember that Attorney General Madigan did try when there were 2 lower court cases that were kind of careening down 2 different paths, and it was not known what would happen if we would have some sort of collision, because there would be a different decision on what Illinois had to pay and what it didn't. She tried to take that to the Supreme Court, and it was a bit of a preemptive move, and the court said, no, we're not going to deal with that now. And the Attorney General, of course, the Speaker's daughter and a Democrat, so you can't disregard that, has talked about how she doesn't understand, doesn't really think that it's right that all of this money is being spent when there isn't an appropriation. And yet she, because of course she has her own political future to consider, one would think, has not further pressed this issue before the state Supreme Court. So I will get to the end of my remarks here in saying that I think that is a key area to watch in terms of, will there be any sort of changes in the status quo? Will there be any additional lawsuits? It's something that the university presidents there have been murmurs about that. Will they press and try to take the state to court in order to get money for higher education? So that's a big thing. Obviously, we all have to watch the city. Is this $800 million ask from a state government that doesn't have $800 million to give. And as Representative Bradley noted, of course, you have a very important constituency with the Chicago legislators, but not everybody's from Chicago, and a whole lot of downstaters that are running for election will have a hard time voting for any sort of bailout for the city when their people have spent so many months struggling. Of course, we all also need to look to...
why don't we stop there?
Okay, there we go. Well, there we go.
All right.
I was going to say, the election. Watch that.
You're right. Anytime a reporter starts rolling out numbers, it's a...
Watch out.
By the way, the moderator just throws this in. Is there enough money in the budget to give every judge a calculator? I mean,
There's enough money in the Supreme Court budget, I will guarantee you that.
Yeah. Yes, remember, they don't live in Illinois. Okay, so, even for me, that's a cheap shot. I know, even for me. All right, any interaction on this? It seems to boils down to the history of the state going down the tubes versus having the middle class going down the tubes. Is that the bottom line, Mr. Bradley?
I think we ought to be talking about the budget. I mean, that's the issue that's right in front of everyone, that is the most important issue in the state of Illinois. And while I'm on that subject, let me compliment Tim Nuding. I mean, we can disagree without being disagreeable. And when he comes to my committee, it's different. He answers my questions to the extent he can, and he tries to work with us to the extent he can. He's in a difficult situation. He's got a boss that's all over the place. But we ought to be talking about the budget. We all know that there are problems. We all know that there are problems in the state of Illinois. We had been making some progress on that, with more work to go. But you can't say the condition of the state is better since November 4th of last year. We were making the pension payments. We're not making the pension payments now, or there's some question about that. The backlog of bills was being paid down. Representative Harris and I had worked very hard over the last 5 or 6 years in the Revenue Committee to work at getting the backlog of bills down. But there was still room to go. It's the worst now than it's been, I think, in years. I mean, this is not helpful. Let's get a budget in place. Let's quit conditioning the budget on passing right to work, or eliminating collective bargaining, or eliminating prevailing wage, which really doesn't save you much, if any money at all, and get to taking care of the people of the state of Illinois.
Nuding, you want to respond?
I would, yeah. Thank you. This is going to sound really odd coming from the budget director, but this is way bigger than the budget. It just is. We're never going to solve Illinois' financial problems by leaving everything aside and just raising taxes and moving on. And in fact, I know that, and you all know that, because we just had a 4-year case study on that very approach. Taxes were raised by 67% in 2011. They sunsetted in 2015, and even with the revenue in place, Illinois was in a worse position at the end of that tax than we were when we started. We still lag the nation in job growth. We still have the highest unfunded pension liability in America. We had backlogs of bills. During the tax increase, Illinois was downgraded 5 times. We achieved a bad word, our lowest credit rating in America during the time of the tax increase. It's not going to work. It didn't work last time. It won't work this time. So respectfully to Representative Bradley, those who say, let's just do a budget and get on with it, that is not going to solve your problems. This is bigger than the budget, and structural changes need to be made to put us in a position to go long-term on the budget and solve it for the long term.
Okay, very good. Notice how the City Club brings people together and how they brings agreement. Okay, we have a series of questions, and one from somebody, perhaps she knows what she's talking about, a City Club member, Leslie Munger, the controller. Where are you, Leslie? Raise your hand. There she is. Spoke here a couple of weeks ago. Only 4 or 5 people took the hemlock, by the way, so you did a good job. And congratulations, one of the longest questions in the history of the City Club. I will simply read it the best I can. We have $7 billion in current bills we cannot pay. Another 10% of our government is not covered by the 3 C's, which amounts to another $3 billion. At that rate, we are building a debt towards 12 or 13 billion behind the end of the calendar year. Our Constitution requires a balanced budget. I just chuckle from all us old Springfield people. How do we get this way if we have to have a balanced budget? Obviously, it's a mere suggestion. To balance the budget, I'm almost done, based on taxes alone would require our income tax rates to increase to approximately 7%. What is your plan to balance the budget? Who is this directed to? Amanda? You and all the numbers. Anyone jump in. What is your plan how do we balance the budget?
Well, the budget that the governor originally sent to the legislature was several $1 billion out of whack. And the House has said we need a fair approach, we need a balanced approach, that we're prepared to do cuts, and there has to be some reasonableness in the way that goes about. Governor Edgar, Governor Thompson have jumped in, and to the previous point have said, get the budget done. We're not going to fix all the problems of the state of Illinois right now, but we could get the budget fixed. We could get the budget fixed, which is a big one, and we could get back to paying down these backlogs of bills. But the main thing we have to do is sit down and talk, and not condition the payment of daycare, the payment of downstate health care, and not condition the school funding on passing things that have nothing to do with the budget. That's the biggest thing I think we could do, is sit down and talk and listen and focus on getting a budget in place under the constitutional process that we all learned in school, through an appropriation, through an either veto, a reduction veto. The legislature gave the governor the tools he needed. He could either sign the bill, which he did in the fact of the K through 12 bill. He signed the K through 12 budget. He could veto it completely, or he could reduce it and then make suggestions as to either how to backfill that or what reductions need to be made. We're all prepared to do that.
Could I just jump
Go ahead,
in there?
Natasha.
Reduction vetoes, I believe you were in the legislature when one, Rod Blagojevich, attempted to do that. And as you know, that with a reduction veto, you need a simple majority to override, and you, in fact, did override those. So how effective would that really have been if Governor Rauner had done that?
I think it could have been very effective with a negotiation and with a sense of focusing on the budget and working through these issues. We did this on the 2015 budget. I was one of the 14 Democrats, and there's a couple others here in the room that voted for the governor's proposed budget 2015. That was a tough vote. We worked together. We took a leap of faith, and then the Good Friday letter came out. And then things that we thought was going to be across the board fair, across the board, and there were winners and losers. Picked and chose what the levels of cuts were and what got cut. That's not fair to anybody. And being from an overlooked area of the state, we're always on the short end of that stick.
Okay. Tim, you want to respond to that, or should we just say IBIT if you want to?
We can move on.
Okay. Wait a minute. Amber Smock, Access Living. Where are you, Amber? Right here. Oh, I'm right in front of me. 34,000 people with disabilities and seniors stand to lose home services if the state moves forward with its proposal to save money by changing eligibility. Why does this proposal remain on the table despite proven cost savings compared to placing these people in nursing facilities? Nothing like giving him an easy question. Who wants to respond?
That sounds like that's for me.
I think it is. I don't want to, because I'm the white line on the middle of the road. I don't want to say it, but Tim, I think you're up.
I would say again that the way the budget is structured with certain expenses being locked into statute, things that the governor wanted to look at to reduce, things like Medicaid rates for providers, to take a look at local government revenue sharing, which is a $6 billion budget item. Medicaid rates are probably an $8 to $10 billion budget item. Pensions are now up to over $8 billion in revenue that we pay to our underfunded pension systems between the payments and the debt that we owe for the pension bondings that happened in the past, which, by the way, that $8 billion, only $2 billion of it is needed to continue normal costs. The other $6 is debt payment on legacy costs that were underfunded in the past. We can't do anything to manage those in this environment because they are regulated by law and those laws remain in place. So the areas that we in the budget office have to try and manage in order to try and get this budget as close to constitutionally balanced as possible are limited. And frankly, they're in the areas of human services and education, and that is by, in my opinion, by design. The legislature knew what they were doing when they passed that budget. They left all of that other spending intact, and now they're sitting back and watching where the governor has to cut to try and make this budget balance. So there are many areas where we are making reductions, hopefully temporarily, to try and balance this budget while we don't have a budget in place and while court orders, consent decrees, and continuing appropes make us spend more than we're bringing in. If we could get to a budget resolution and change the structural integrity of the state so that we can grow going forward, I believe the budget office and the governor will be looking at those areas to provide funding. But at this time, the way the budget is structured, we have to manage to the best of our ability.
Are you talking about the rule change that took place in JCAR? That's what the question is. The governor's office came into JCAR.
Why don't you say what JCAR is? You're in Chicago now. That's JCAR now.
Thanks.
Come on.
You don't know what JCAR is?
Come on.
Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, which Leader Lang is a senior member of, that actually puts the rules into place that go along with the legislation. And so the administration came in with this rule change outside of the normal bounds of the democratic process. And as a result of it, very likely could result, and I think the number I heard, I'm not going to contest that, 34,000 people that are trying to work, take care of their families, not being able to get what they need. Nobody in this room, I would think, would agree with that. You got people that are using this as a resource to work, to lift themselves up, and that's being eliminated by rule. Not by democratic process, not by legislation, by rule.
All right. Okay, moving on, as we're really bringing us all together on this, I could just see it. I could feel it. I know, I'm sure you can too. We will end with all of us singing Kumbaya. Steve Abbey, where in the hell are you? Right in the back. City Club member. And a very short question. What will happen to MAP grants, by the way, isn't it? Oh, MAP grants, okay, for low-income college students this fiscal year?
That's one of the 10%. That's one of the 10% of the budget that hasn't been agreed to by court order. And Randy Dunn from SIU's here. How do I look at the folks at SIU down in my area and tell them that their funding is conditioned on us eliminating prevailing wage? Again, those are the options we're being presented. MAP grant funds are a way for folks to get into the middle class. They keep our universities open in the state of Illinois. This is a way to pull ourselves up, to lift ourselves up. These are programs that get people in the middle class.
Could I?
Go right ahead. I think you should, yeah.
I think it's really easy to sit here and talk about all the things you're for when you don't have the money to pay for them. Again, we need to change the way things are done in this state. It's been an abject failure for the last 15 years, and the governor has some requests to change the way we do business in this state so that we can grow jobs and grow the economy. We want to fund these programs as much as the next person, We just want to make sure we have the money long-term to do it by growing the economy. That's the difference.
And
Okay.
yet, those
Amanda.
conversations aren't happening, I think is what we need to get across, is that there does not appear to be any sort of true negotiation. We know the turnaround agenda, we know where each side stands on it, but there isn't the conversation about how do you get to some sort of happy medium if there is one. It's not happening.
Well, it's not surprising, given this. I could see why waste your time having a conversation? You just, like on Channel 11 with some state senators who come on, they just keep playing the same show over and over again because nothing has changed. All right, that was down the middle of the road. Bob Manwith, where are you? Former colleague at WGN. Glad you made the room, Bob. Retired. How do you, I guess, Mr. Bradley, this is for you. How do you mesh right to work ending, collective bargaining, and prevailing wage with protecting the middle class?
Well, the evidence is pretty clear that the biggest driver of the middle class is the right for folks to organize, and the unions. I mean, that's the quickest way to the middle class. And when you're talking about prevailing wage, that's not just a union issue, that lifts everybody up. That provides a fair wage, a living wage for everyone. That should not be a partisan issue. Collective bargaining, that's a fundamental democratic principle to be able to get together and decide whether or not you want to collectively bargain something. And what was the third one? Right to work? Mm-hmm. Right to work is just wrong. I mean, you're gonna, the consequences of enacting those things beyond just the building trades or the other unions is significant and has a significant effect on all parts of our economy and the entire middle class. And you can't just say, well, that's a union thing. That's an American thing. That's a middle class thing. These are all programs that benefit the middle class that are under attack right now.
Can I just add, I think, I have no comment on that, but just the political angle of that being that, the governor had, during the campaign, of course, as we all know, first in the primary, talked a ton about bad government union bosses, and then dropped it completely. Then I was at that speech in Decatur. All of a sudden, you hear right to work zones again. And I do think that is directly related to the budget discussion outside of what it means for the state economy, but just from a political perspective, where legislators are at. That has become such a wedge issue, and even though the governor now says that he has dropped right to work zones, those words change the dynamic, as did the quote-unquote Good Friday Massacre, what have you. That has incredibly changed the tenor. Democrats are holding closer together because of that. They're tighter with unions. Unions are going to be closer with Democrats because of it. Those three words did a whole lot to change where we're at in fiscal year 2016.
Just to give some context, because you guys don't really know me, but I'm the conservative Democrat that negotiated the workers' comp bill. I'm the conservative Democrat, the son of teachers, that voted for the pension reform. I'm the conservative Democrat, again, that helped negotiate the unemployment bill. And we did that working together with all groups, sitting labor and business down and working through that. So when I say these things are out there, they're radical. They are radical. They are extreme. These proposals that are being put on the table that are conditions for doing a budget are extreme.
Can I just interject
Sure,
there
Natasha,
that,
jump in.
and that's how a lot of this discussion has been framed. I do believe that Governor Rauner's initial, little tour on right to work, as I said earlier, alienated a lot of people in both parties. But I think he's made many overtures that he's willing to take a lot less. And I guess from the outside, some of us wonder, like, if the Democrats had just thrown him a bone of some kind, anything, at the end of May, if perhaps we'd be a lot farther along here. And then I realize your response to that would be that you don't, there was nothing there for you that you would agree with.
No, that wouldn't be my response. My response would be that I've called his property tax proposal 15 times for a vote.
But it's not the same proposal.
Yeah, it's his proposal.
It doesn't include the collective bargaining.
Well, we have two amendments. We do the in order to give him actual chance to pass it, we do the First Amendment, which is the property tax, and the Second Amendment, which I don't support, which involves the prevailing wage of collective bargaining. So they have the opportunity to get the package they want.
But it's still you introducing it instead of a Republican, which is why this is so very political. I mean, Democrats aren't allowing a Republican to actually sponsor and bring to the floor that very same proposal. They're not. And I mean, so there's so much of this little kind of political games makes it sound like a light thing, and it isn't. I mean, there is a whole lot of gamesmanship, political ship, I don't know, that goes on from both parties, frankly. But that's an example of, as Natasha said, Democrats not being willing to play.
We have 2 more questions to go because we'd like to end on time, though we could go on forever. Though I think the main points have been made over and over again. So let's just, by the way, there are a lot of you are talking about the balanced budget and all that stuff. I won't read those. We've kind of did that. And those of us who've been around a long time knows that. Ms. Munger, you don't get to this much in debt by every time passing a balanced budget, just so the record will show. So we'll leave those aside. Richard Ciccarone? How? Sister. Really? Oh, okay. It's your name. You call it what you like. Merit Research Services. By the way, that's merit with 2 R's. It seems like the budget process has been diminished to the point that it is only marginally relevant. Well, what the hell are we doing here then if that's the case? At what point does it become, I can't read, you cross that out, unconstitutional to spend 90% of the state's expenditures without a legal completion of the budget process? Very good question.
I think we're going to find out after the first of the year when there's not enough money to honor those agreements that have been made between the executive and the judiciary.
Yeah, it's unconstitutional. We've been unconstitutional for a number of years. Legislatures have continually passed budgets that spent more than they took in. That's how you acquire a backlog of bills, which, by the way, in other states is unheard of. They don't even allow it to happen. In Illinois, we have laws that let us do that, to push off pressure by pushing off bills. So what's going to happen if there's no agreement and courts stay where they're at and they continue to make us spend? We're going to end up with a giant, much larger backlog of bills, and that process is going to continue. And it's wrong, and it's the wrong way to run a government. It's been done for a while. We'd like to end that. I personally would like to get a budget balanced for the long term, looking at least a 5 or 10 year outlook, and get rid of the provisions in law that allow us to do that. But we're a long way from there right now.
Okay, Peter Scosi, MP, Metropolitan Planning Council. Where are you, Peter? You were walking out, weren't you?
Perfect timing.
Didn't think I'd ask your question.
He's back.
I know Mary Sue. All right, I've heard that after budget and little bigger print. I've heard that after budget is resolved, transportation infrastructure is something everyone wants to do. Do you agree?
Yes.
In other words, once they solve the budget?
Yes.
There is a short answer. Yes. All right. Leave it to Peter to leave us. The moderator has a quick question. Since I wrote my first article on Illinois government way back when, during the Walker administration, if some of you remember him, way back when, I know you do, Stella, and so does Ms. Wick. All this stuff you're talking about, Tim, the structure not being blah, 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 that's old news. It took a lot of time to screw up the structure. So why don't you settle for part reform and you give up part of your thing and compromise and fight the battle out next year? I mean, why ask for the whole damn thing if it took us 40, 50, 60, perhaps since 1818 to get to this point?
Well, I don't think Governor Rauner's asked for the whole darn thing. He's already moved to some degree, and he's, as Natasha mentioned, he's mentioned a willingness to be able to negotiate to get to a solution that both the majority party and he and the minorities in the legislature can come together on. He's open, but he does believe strongly, and I absolutely believe he's right about this, that the state of Illinois, if you view it as sick, and we are, does not need a little dose of amoxicillin. It needs more than that. We need something to cure the disease, and that's what he's looking for.
So you're saying that that disease has to be cured in this negotiation?
I think a large part of it, yes. What are we waiting for?
Okay. John, you want to comment?
Yeah, what are we waiting for? Let's get the budget done.
All right, now that we've got resolved this, I hope you know that, how about a big round of applause? This was tremendous.